The silence before the storm. The world was changing faster than anyone could predict. Trade wars, political speeches, hidden deals behind closed doors. All of it was part of a larger storm that ordinary people only heard about in headlines. But behind every headline, there were men and women who had to carry the weight of those decisions. Sundar Pichai was one of them. It was a warm evening in California. Sundar sat by the window of his quiet office, the last rays of the sun painting the sky in shades of red and gold. His phone lay on the desk face down, though it had been buzzing endlessly all afternoon. Every news channel was repeating the same shocking story. President Trump had announced a 50% tariff on all major imports from India. The reporters called it a historic blow. Some said it was the start of a new Cold War in trade. Others said it was only the beginning of chaos. Sundar knew the truth was more complicated. He knew what this meant for millions of workers in India, for countless families whose livelihoods depended on exports, for the fragile bridge of trust that had been built between two nations over decades. He leaned back in his chair and closed his eyes. Memories of his childhood in Chennai came rushing back, the smell of hot tea in the mornings, his father tinkering with an old scooter, his mother worrying about bills but still finding ways to smile. He remembered the day he first touched a computer, the day he realized that technology was not just a machine, it was a doorway to possibilities. All of that had led him here, to this moment, where his voice and actions could shape history. The hook of the evening news was sharp. India's Prime Minister Modi has promised a bold and surprising reply. Washington is waiting. Silicon Valley is watching. How will Sundar Pichai respond? Sundar never thought of himself as a politician. He avoided the spotlight when it came to matters of power and diplomacy. But tonight, he felt the weight of expectation pressing down on him. Google was not just a company when it was a symbol of global connection. And Sundar, an Indian man leading one of America's most powerful firms, stood in the middle of this storm, whether he wanted to or not. As he stared into the darkening sky, his assistant knocked softly and entered. Her face was pale, her hands clutching a folder. "The calls are stacking up," she said. "Reporters, senators, even some from Delhi. They all want a statement from you." Sundar hesitated. Part of him wanted to stay silent, to let the politicians fight their battles. But silence had its own cost. People were looking to him for hope, for clarity, for something human in the middle of this political theater. "Tell them I'll speak tomorrow," he said quietly. "But not to the press. I'll speak to the people." His assistant blinked, confused. "The people?" "Yes," Sundar said firmly, though his voice carried the weight of doubt. "The people deserve the truth. Not the polished words of politics, but the simple truth of what this means for their lives." The next morning, the headlines grew louder. Commentators spoke of collapsing markets, broken trust, and a world sliding toward division. But in India, the air was filled with something else, or a rising fire of pride. Prime Minister Modi had given a short but powerful statement late in the night. "India will not bow. Our reply will surprise the world." The words spread like wildfire across social media. Some cheered, some trembled. What kind of reply could shake the United States? Sundar woke early, long before the sun rose. He walked alone through his garden, the grass wet with dew, the silence broken only by distant birdsong. He thought of the millions of young Indians who dreamed of working in technology, of families hoping their small businesses would reach global markets, of workers already fearing layoffs as companies recalculated their costs. He knew what was coming. Tariffs were not just numbers on a paper, they were walls. And every wall kept out not just products, but people's hopes. As he walked, he remembered his father's words when he left India to study abroad. "Never forget where you come from, Sundar. No matter how far you go, carry our story with you. Carry it with respect and humility." Those words echoed now, stronger than ever. He returned to his desk and opened his laptop. A blank document stared at him, waiting to be filled with words that would be played across televisions, radios, and smartphones around the world. He typed slowly at first, then faster, pouring not political arguments but human truths onto the page. He wrote about resilience, he wrote about kindness, he wrote about the power of respect, not just between people but between nations. He wrote about humility, reminding the world that no matter how big or powerful a country was, it owed its strength to the ordinary men and women who worked each day with hope in their hearts. As the speech took shape, he felt the tension in his chest ease, if only slightly. This was not about taking sides, this was about building bridges, but he also knew bridges were easy to talk about and very hard to build when storms raged on both shores. Just then, his phone rang again. It was an unknown number, but his instinct told him to answer. He pressed the button and held the phone to his ear. A familiar, deep voice spoke. "Mr. Pichai, this is Prime Minister Modi." Sundar froze for a moment, then straightened in his chair. "Prime Minister," he said softly. "I will be blunt," Modi said. "America has thrown a stone into the river. The ripples will reach every home in India. But I want the world to know something before our official response. I want them to hear it from you. Will you stand with us?" Sundar's heart raced. This was the moment he had feared and expected all at once. Standing with India could put him at odds with Washington. Remaining neutral could make him look weak. Either way, history would remember his choice. He closed his eyes, and in the silence of that second, he saw his father's tired face, his mother's gentle smile, the streets of Chennai, the friends he had left behind but never forgotten. When he opened his eyes, his voice was steady. "I will stand with what is right. I will stand with respect. And I will stand with the people." On the other end, there was silence. Then, Modi's voice, calm but fierce. "Good. Then be ready, because tonight the world will hear us both." The hook tightened. The news cycle would not let go. That evening, millions waited in front of their screens, wondering what Modi's bold reply would be, and what role Sundar Pichai would play in it. And as Sundar walked onto a stage prepared in a quiet studio, cameras ready, lights shining, into his eyes he realized something. This was not just about trade or politics. This was about identity, dignity, and the fragile line between conflict and cooperation. The words were ready in his heart. But when he looked into the cameras, he realized that no matter what he said, the world would never be the same again. The weight of silence. The studio lights burned into Sundar's eyes, hot and unyielding, as the paper was slipped into his hand. For a moment, the world around him disappeared. He could no longer hear the hum of the cameras, the quiet whispers of the crew, or even the thud of his own heartbeat. All he saw were the words on that small piece of paper, written in rushed handwriting, urgent, shaking with the weight of their meaning. "Trump announces immediate freeze on Indian tech contracts, effective midnight." His mouth went dry. Every word of the speech he had prepared now seemed like it belonged to another world, a calmer world that no longer existed. He looked up at the cameras, millions of eyes already on him, waiting, demanding, hungry for answers. The silence stretched, a silence heavy enough to crack open the air itself. In those seconds, Sundar realized something profound. Power was not in speeches written carefully on paper. Power was in the ability to hold the silence, to carry the weight of truth without flinching, to face fear without letting it bend your voice. His father's words echoed again. "Respect is not what you demand. It is what you give first, even to those who oppose you." He folded the paper slowly, placed it on the podium, and spoke, his voice calm, but carrying the strength of someone who had crossed oceans, deserts, and the fragile bridges of dreams. "Tonight," he began, "we stand at a moment that will be remembered for years to come. Decisions have been made that may divide us, but we must remember something deeper. Nations are not built by politicians alone. They are built by people, by workers, by families, by children who dream. Tariffs and freezes cannot crush the human spirit. They cannot erase kindness. They cannot silence resilience." The words flowed not from the prepared speech but from his heart. The crew, trained to remain still and professional, leaned closer without realizing it. Across India, televisions in crowded tea stalls buzzed. Young workers huddled together in dormitories to listen. Mothers in small homes turned up the volume while their children paused their studies. In America, analysts scribbled notes. Investors stared at graphs. Ordinary people watched with a strange mix of curiosity and unease. Sundar continued, his voice rising with quiet conviction. I know what it means to struggle. I have lived through it. I have walked streets where dreams seem too far away to touch. But I also know this. Struggle does not break us. It teaches us. It makes us stronger. It reminds us that respect, humility, and kindness are not weaknesses. They are our greatest strengths. And no tariff, no wall, no contract freeze can take that away. The broadcast lasted only 15 minutes. But when it ended, the silence that followed was not empty. It was charged. Across the world, people sat still for a moment longer, unsure of what they had just witnessed. Some felt inspired. Some felt shaken. Some felt challenged. In Washington, White House advisors replayed the clip, debating whether Sundar had just made himself an enemy or a bridge. In Delhi, Modi smiled faintly, knowing the message was exactly what he wanted. The world to hear, though not in the way anyone had expected. And in homes scattered across both nations, people who had never heard Sundar speak before now felt as if they knew him, as if he had walked into their living rooms and spoken directly to them. But the storm was only beginning. That night, Sundar barely slept. He sat by the window watching the city lights flicker in the distance. Every hour his phone buzzed with new messages, praise from those who admired his words, warnings from those who thought he had gone too far, pleas from workers afraid of losing their jobs. He opened one message at random. It was from a small business owner in India. Sir, we export hand-woven fabrics to the U.S. If the tariffs continue and the freeze remains, we will have to close in 2 weeks. My workers will be on the street. Please do not stop speaking. You are our voice. Another message came from an American worker in Ohio. My factory depends on affordable parts from India. Now we might shut down. My family has nothing else. Thank you for reminding us that it is not about politics, it is about people. Please keep talking. Sundar set the phone down. The voices were too many, too heavy. He felt the weight of each life, each dream, pressing against him like stones. For the first time, he wondered if he was strong enough to carry them. The next morning, the newspapers were filled with headlines. Pichai calls for unity amid trade. Chaos. Modi's mystery response. Still no details. Trump doubles down. We will not back down. The stage was set for something larger than speeches. The world now expected action, and Sundar knew he would be pulled deeper into the center of it. At breakfast, his daughter asked him a question that cut through all the noise. Papa, why are people fighting about where things come from? Don't they know we all share the same sky? Her innocent words pierced him more deeply than any headline. He smiled gently, though his heart ached. Sometimes, he said softly, people forget the sky is bigger than their walls. And he realized then, this was not just about economics or politics. This was about teaching the world to remember the sky. That afternoon, he received another call from Delhi. This time, it was not Modi but one of his closest advisors. The voice on the line was sharp, urgent. Mr. Pichai, Modi's reply is ready. Tonight at midnight, India will announce its decision. But before that, he wants you to know something. This is not just a reply to America. It is a statement to the world. And when it happens, we will need you again. Because what comes next will shake the ground beneath all of us. Sundar sat in silence, his hand tightening around the phone. He had thought the tariffs were the storm. He was wrong. The real storm was still gathering, dark and powerful on the horizon. The night of the announcement, the clock in Sundar's office ticked louder than usual. Each second felt like a drumbeat counting down to something inevitable. The air was heavy, almost too thick to breathe as midnight in Delhi approached. Somewhere across the ocean, India was preparing to speak, and the world was waiting with tense silence. In Washington, advisors rushed through hallways, drafting statements, preparing countermeasures. In Delhi, ministers huddled in closed rooms, their faces grave but their voices steady. In California, Sundar sat alone by his desk, the glow of the screen casting shadows on his tired face. He tried to distract himself by looking through reports, charts, messages from his teams across the globe. But none of it could drown the rising sound inside his chest, the mix of fear, hope, and responsibility that came when history shifted before your very eyes. Then, just minutes before the clock struck midnight in Delhi, his phone buzzed with a notification. A live stream had gone up. The words glowed on the screen. Prime Minister Modi addresses the nation. Sundar hesitated only a moment before clicking. The screen filled with an image of Modi standing firm, his voice calm but carrying the sharpness of a blade. "Brothers and sisters of India," Modi began, his eyes steady. "Tonight I speak not only to you but to the entire world. We have heard the decisions made in Washington. We have seen the walls they are trying to build, and we say this clearly: India will not bow. India will not be broken. Our reply is not revenge. Our reply is dignity." The words rolled like thunder, reaching villages and cities, homes and offices. Millions listened, leaning closer, trying to read between every line. Modi continued, his tone growing stronger. "From this day forward, India will take bold steps. We will not depend on any nation for our future. We will build, we will create, we will rise." And to our friends across the ocean, let me say this: respect cannot be demanded through tariffs. Respect is earned through partnership. If they close their doors, we will open new ones. If they raise walls, we will build bridges elsewhere. India's spirit cannot be taxed, and India's people cannot be silenced. The speech lasted only 20 minutes, but when it ended, the ground itself seemed to shift. News channels exploded with commentary, some praising India's defiance, others warning of escalating conflict. Markets wavered, investors panicked, families debated in living rooms. But there was something else, something deeper, that began to stir across the world. A sense that India was no longer playing the role assigned to it. It was stepping onto the stage not as a follower, but as a leader. Sundar sat frozen long after the stream ended. He knew Modi's words would echo in every boardroom in Silicon Valley, every government hall in Washington, every crowded street in Mumbai. And he also knew this was not just politics anymore. This was personal. His phone buzzed again. This time it was not a message, but a call. He recognized the number instantly: Washington. With a slow breath, he answered. The voice on the other end was clipped, sharp, carrying the weight of power. "Mr. Pichai, this is the Secretary of Commerce. I trust you have seen Modi's speech. The President is not pleased. He wants to know where you stand." Sundar gripped the phone tightly. The question was simple, but the meaning was enormous. If he sided openly with India, he risked angering the very government under which his company operated. If he appeared too close to Washington, he would betray his own people and the workers whose hopes now rested on him. He closed his eyes. Silence stretched for a long moment. Then he spoke slowly, choosing each word as if it were a stone laid carefully on a fragile bridge. "I stand with respect," he said, "and respect means listening to voices on both sides. I will not reduce people's lives to a political choice." The official on the line exhaled sharply, clearly displeased. "That is not an answer, Mr. Pichai. It is the only answer I can give," Sundar replied, his voice steady. The line went silent, then clicked off. For the first time in years, Sundar felt a tremor of fear in his chest. Not fear of failure, but fear of being crushed between forces larger than himself. He remembered his daughter's words again. "Don't they know we all share the same sky?" And he wondered if anyone in power could see that sky anymore, or if their vision was trapped by walls they kept building higher and higher. As the night deepened, messages poured in again, faster than he could read. Some praised him for staying calm. Others accused him of cowardice. Some begged him to take a side. All of them wanted something from him. But Sundar knew he could not be everything to everyone. He could only be true to himself, to the values that had guided him from a small home in Chennai to this stage of history. Humility, resilience, kindness, respect. And yet, as he looked out the window at the stars above, he felt the storm pressing closer, darker, hungrier. He knew this was only the beginning. Cliffhanger ending of Part 3, Segment 1. A soft knock came at his door. His assistant entered, her face pale, her hands shaking. She held out a tablet with breaking news flashing across the screen. Sundar read the headline once, twice, his stomach tightening with each word. China responds, announces full support for India against U.S. tariffs. The world had just shifted again. Shifting alliances, the headline glowed on the tablet. Its letters heavy as stone. China responds, announces full support for India against U.S. tariffs. Sundar stared at it, his mind racing. The weight of this new reality sank in slowly, like a tide rising over a sleeping shore. One ripple of tariffs had turned into waves that now threatened to drown entire economies. He leaned back in his chair, pressing his fingers against his temples. He had lived his life in the world of technology, where progress was measured in code, in products, in ideas. But now he was standing in the middle of something much older and much more dangerous, the great game of nations, where alliances could either build bridges or light fires that burned across generations. China's support for India was no small gesture. It was a message carved in steel, telling Washington that the balance of power was shifting. For decades, America had stood as the center of gravity in the world economy. But now, cracks were forming in that center, and through those cracks came whispers of a future where new powers rose. Sundar's assistant whispered nervously, "Sir, reporters are already asking for your comment. They want to know if you will support this new alliance." He shook his head slowly. Not yet. The wrong word now could turn a spark into a fire. But deep down, he knew silence was no shield. The world would demand his voice again, louder this time. That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Sundar walked alone through the quiet streets near his home. His phone buzzed constantly in his pocket, but he ignored it. He needed air. He needed space to think. The smell of blooming jasmine drifted from a neighbor's garden. A group of children laughed as they raced their bicycles down the sidewalk, their joy unbroken by the storms of politics swirling above their heads. Sundar envied that innocence, that simple belief that tomorrow would always be safe. He remembered his own childhood again, the nights when the power would go out in Chennai, and his family would sit together by candlelight. They would talk, laugh, and dream, even in the darkness. Those moments had taught him resilience. They had taught him that strength was not in wealth or power, but in the bonds of kindness that held people together when everything else fell apart. Now, as the world tilted toward conflict, he wondered if those same lessons could guide entire nations. Back in his office, the phone finally forced itself back into his hand. This time, the call was from an unexpected place, Beijing. The voice on the line was smooth, formal, but with an edge that cut through the politeness. "Mr. Pichai," the official said, "China welcomes India's stand. We also welcome voices, like yours, voices that remind the world of dignity. We hope you will speak again, not just as an Indian, not just as a leader of a company, but as a man who understands that kindness is stronger than division." Sundar hesitated. "And if I do not? Then the world will hear other voices, ones that do not speak of kindness, but of strength. And strength, when it has no respect, becomes dangerous." The line clicked off, leaving only silence. Sundar placed the phone down slowly, his mind spinning. The choice before him was not simply between silence and speech, but between paths that could shape the very way nations saw each other. If he aligned himself with China and India, Washington would turn against him. If he distanced himself, he risked betraying the millions who now looked to him for hope. The storm had widened, and he was standing in the eye of it. The next day, news channels erupted again. Analysts debated whether a new world order was forming, one where America no longer held the same weight it once did. Markets swung wildly, investors searching for stability in a sea of uncertainty. Families across continents whispered about what this meant for jobs, for prices, for futures already uncertain. And once again, Sundar's inbox filled with voices. A Farmer in India wrote, "Sir, if China stands with us, maybe our crops will find new markets. Maybe my children can stay in school. Please do not let this chance slip away." A teacher in the US wrote, "My students' parents are losing jobs because of these freezes. I do not know how to explain this to children. They ask me why countries cannot just share. I have no answer for them." The words cut deep. Every message was a reminder that beyond the language of tariffs and alliances, real lives were at stake. That night, Sundar dreamed of home again. He dreamed of his father sitting on the veranda, quietly repairing a broken radio. His father looked up and said, "A broken thing can be fixed, Sundar, but only if you care enough to try. If you throw it away, it is gone forever." He woke with those words burning in his chest. Perhaps that was the lesson the world needed now. Not to throw away what was broken, but to try to fix it, with respect, with patience, with humility. But would the world listen? The room of decisions, the private jet sliced quietly through the night sky, its windows glowing faintly as the world below disappeared into shadows. Sundar sat by the window, his thoughts as restless as the winds carrying him toward Delhi. The email had been short, almost cryptic, but its meaning was clear. Modi wanted him present for a conversation that could shape not just India's future, but the entire global balance of power. The hum of the engines filled the silence, a steady reminder that he was hurtling toward something that felt larger than himself. He had given speeches, faced cameras, answered sharp questions from governments and journalists. But this was different. This was the kind of meeting where decisions were not just spoken, they were carved into the future, leaving scars that would last generations. He closed his eyes, remembering his daughter's innocent words again. "Don't they know we all share the same sky?" It was simple, almost childlike, but it carried a truth deeper than all the strategies and alliances debated in grand halls. What good were tariffs, contracts, and power plays if they destroyed the very people they claimed to protect? The plane landed in the dark, away from cameras, away from curious eyes. Black cars waited on the runway, their headlights sharp against the night. Without ceremony, Sundar was escorted into one, the door shutting with a heavy thud. The drive was long and silent, winding through empty roads until the car stopped before a building with no name, no markings, only shadows stretching like watchful guards. Inside, the air was cool, the walls plain, but the tension was thick, pressing down on every breath. In a large, dimly lit room, Prime Minister Modi stood by a long wooden table. His eyes met Sundar's, sharp and unreadable, yet carrying a flicker of warmth beneath the steel. "You came," Modi said simply, his voice low but steady. "You asked," Sundar replied. For a moment, neither man spoke. They simply stood there. Two figures caught in the current of history, one carrying the weight of a nation, the other the voice of a bridge between nations. Modi gestured for Sundar to sit. Papers lay spread across the table, maps, charts, reports of markets plunging and factories stalling. At the center was a single document, its words bold and heavy: Strategic Economic Alliance Proposal. "China has offered us full partnership," Modi said, his hand resting on the document. "Shared markets, shared technology, shared future. They promise to stand with us against Washington. But their promises come at a cost. And before I sign anything, I want your eyes on it. I want your heart on it." Sundar leaned forward, scanning the pages. At first glance, it looked like opportunity. Vast new investments, protection against tariffs, promises of growth. But between the lines, he saw something else: dependency. Once India accepted this hand, it would no longer walk entirely on its own path. It would be bound, its choices tied to another power's will. He looked up at Modi. "This is strength, yes, but it is also a chain." Modi's eyes narrowed, though not in anger. It was the look of a man weighing truths too heavy for simple answers. "And what would you have us do, Sundar? Washington has turned its back on us. Our workers are on the edge of collapse. Our pride demands we stand tall. What path do you see that I cannot?" The question was not rhetorical. It was heavy, real. Sundar felt the weight of it pressing into his chest. He had no magic answer, no simple road that avoided pain. But he knew something deeper. The true strength was not in choosing between two powers, but in remembering the dignity of walking forward without bowing to either. Prime Minister, Sundar said slowly, his voice carrying the careful tone of someone speaking both as a son of India and as a citizen of the world. India does not need to be America's shadow, nor should it be China's partner bound in chains. India has something greater, its people, its resilience, its dreams. If you remind the world of that, they will come not because we bend to them, but because they cannot ignore us. Modi studied him for a long moment. Silence filled the room, broken only by the ticking of a clock on the far wall. Finally, he spoke, his voice softer but no less firm. You speak of dignity, of pride, of resilience, but dignity does not fill empty stomachs, Sundar. Pride does not pay wages. Resilience does not keep the lights on in factories when orders vanish. The words were sharp, but they were true. Sundar felt their sting deeply. Yet he also knew that nations that sold their future for survival today often woke tomorrow to find their spirit gone. He leaned closer, his voice urgent now, but without dignity, without respect. India will always be someone else's tool. Is that the future you want to leave behind? Modi's eyes burned with intensity. I want a future where no child in India goes hungry because of another country's decisions. I want a future where no worker in our factories fears the collapse of markets set thousands of miles away. Tell me, Sundar, can your bridges give me that? The room was heavy, the air itself trembling with the force of unspoken truths. Sundar did not answer immediately. He thought of his own journey, of how respect and humility had guided him further than he had ever dreamed. He thought of his father, who fixed broken radios not because it was easy, but because it mattered. Finally, he said, bridges do not fill stomachs, but they stop wars, they stop walls. And from peace, from respect, comes growth that lasts. Yes, Prime Minister, it is harder. Yes, it is slower, but it is the only way that does not end in chains. Modi leaned back, his gaze unbroken, his silence as sharp as his words had been. Sundar could not tell if he had convinced him, or if he had simply added another weight to a balance already tipping dangerously. The breaking point. The room fell silent after Sundar read the note. The words felt like a hammer striking against fragile glass, sending invisible cracks through everything he thought could still be saved. Washington announces sanctions on Indian technology firms effective immediately. For a long moment, the only sound was the ticking of the clock on the wall, steady, indifferent to the storm tearing through the world outside. Modi sat motionless, his fingers pressed together, his eyes fixed on something far away. Sundar felt the weight of millions pressing against his chest, each life tied to those words on the paper. Sanctions were more than punishment. They were suffocation. Companies in India would be cut off from vital contracts, denied access to key systems, locked out of opportunities they had built over decades. Engineers, programmers, small businesses, all of them would feel the walls closing in. Sundar thought of the messages he had been receiving for weeks. The farmer worried about his crops, the worker in Ohio afraid of losing his factory, the teacher who could not explain to her students why nations built walls instead of bridges. He saw their faces now, not as words on a screen, but as living souls waiting for something, anything, to keep them from falling into despair. They are tightening the noose, Modi said at last, his voice low, almost a whisper. First tariffs, now sanctions. Tomorrow it will be something else. They believe we will break. They believe India will kneel. His eyes shifted to Sundar, sharp, searching. Tell me, do you believe that? Sundar's throat tightened. He wanted to say no, to speak with certainty, but the truth was heavier. India would not break easily, but the pain would be real, the scars deep. Resilience was powerful, yes, but resilience always carried a cost. Finally he spoke, his words steady but soft. I believe India will not kneel, but I also believe The world cannot survive if we answer walls with walls, sanctions with sanctions. There has to be another way. Modi leaned forward. Another way? You speak of bridges again. Tell me, Sundar, where is this bridge? Show it to me. Because I do not see it. Sundar felt his heart race. He had no blueprint, no document to place on the table. All he had was belief. Belief in the values his parents had taught him. Belief in the lessons carved by his own journey. Belief that respect and kindness were not weaknesses but strengths. And for the first time, he wondered if belief was enough. That night, after the meeting ended, Sundar returned to his room in Delhi, unable to sleep. The city outside was restless, lights burning late into the night as if the whole country was holding its breath. He sat by the window, staring at the streets below, watching the quiet movements of people going about their lives. He saw a rickshaw driver helping an old woman carry her bags. He saw children running barefoot, their laughter echoing even in the shadows. He saw shopkeepers closing their shutters, bowing their heads to neighbors in quiet respect before walking home. These small acts, simple and unnoticed, reminded him of something he had almost forgotten. Strength was not only in governments and policies. Strength lived in ordinary people who carried kindness in their daily lives. Strength lived in humility, in resilience, in the quiet dignity of those who refused to give up. And maybe, just maybe, that was the bridge Modi could not see. Not a physical structure, not a political treaty, but a human bridge. A reminder that nations were built not just by leaders, but by people. He opened his laptop and began to write. Not a speech for television, not a press release for markets, but a message to people everywhere. He wrote about his childhood, about the broken radios his father repaired, about his mother's laughter even when money was short. He wrote about dreams that seemed impossible, but became real through patience and humility. He wrote about kindness as a force stronger than any sanction, and about resilience as the quiet fire that no wall could smother. The words flowed like water, honest and unpolished, each one carrying a piece of his heart. By morning, the message was ready. Sundar released it online, not through governments or corporations, but directly to people. And within hours, it spread like wildfire. Students shared it in classrooms. Workers passed it around in factories. Families read it aloud in their homes. People in India, America, China, and beyond began to talk, not of tariffs or sanctions, but of respect, humility, resilience, and kindness. Some dismissed it as naive. Others called it brave. But many, far more than Sundar expected, felt something stir inside them, something that reminded them that they were not just pawns in the games of power. They were human beings, connected by hopes and fears, by laughter and tears by the same sky above their heads, and slowly voices began to rise. An American worker wrote, "We do not want to fight India. We want to work together again." An Indian teacher wrote, "Let us show the world we can rise without hate." A Chinese student wrote, "The bridge is real. We are the bridge." In Washington, the president scowled as advisors handed him reports. Sanctions were in place. Tariffs still stood. But the people, on both sides, were beginning to question the cost of division. In Delhi, Modi watched the same reports, his face unreadable. He was a man of politics, of power, but even he could not ignore the rising tide of voices that were no longer shouting in anger, but speaking in hope. And in Beijing, leaders studied the movement carefully, realizing that no matter how many deals they offered, the true strength of India might not lie in alliances but in its ability to inspire.